The day my family abandoned me at the airport, I discovered the price of my own worth. And it wasn't the one-way ticket they bought me. The sentence echoed in my mind. A stark and brutal headline for the scene unfolding before me. The Louis Vuitton luggage, hard-shelled and the color of a blood moon, gleamed arrogantly under the unforgiving fluorescent lights of Nashville International. My daughter-in-law, Amanda, a vision of cold efficiency in a camel hair coat, wheeled her designer set through the first-class lane, without a single glance back. My son Jason, my only child, trailed behind her, a handsome ghost in expensive sunglasses, looking more like her accessory than my flesh and blood. "You've got a phone." Amanda's voice cut through the terminal's hum, crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't even turn her head fully, just offered the words over her shoulder. That practiced, sympathetic smile I now recognized as a weapon. Default text, "Call someone to come get you." Or sell it. That'll cover a Greyhound, right? The words didn't just hang in the air. They seeped into it, poisoning the sterile, recycled atmosphere. They were a verdict. Then, they were gone. Swallowed by the security checkpoint. Absorbed into the tunnel of gates and vacation selfies. And overpriced Cinnabons, taking with them the last ounce of dignity I still possessed in their eyes. I stood frozen, a 68-year-old statue in a river of moving, purposeful bodies. No suitcase, no boarding pass. Just a thin cardigan that suddenly felt as insubstantial as tissue paper. And the printed itinerary in my hand, which I now realized was nothing but pure theater. A prop in a cruel play, where I was the unwitting fool. The noise of the airport swelled around me. A symphony of belonging that underscored my exile. A final boarding call for Orlando. A shriek of joyful children. The relentless clack-clack-clack of rolling suitcases over polished tile. Laughter in a language of families and plans that I no longer understood. People glanced, their eyes skimming over me, then looking away just as quickly, embarrassed by whatever story my stillness told. I wanted the polished floor to open up and swallow me. I wanted to dissolve into the conditioned air. And for one breathtaking, terrifying moment, I did. The world blurred at the edges. The sounds muffled into a distant roar, and I was nowhere and no one. Just hours earlier, I had woken up with a fluttering in my chest, believing I was part of something. A family healing getaway, they'd called it. The words had felt like a bomb. After the funeral, after Jake, my husband, God rest his soul, had passed 2 months ago. 1 week after his 71st birthday, 42 years married. We buried him on a rainy Monday, the mud clinging to our shoes, a sucking, solemn sound with every step away from his grave. The silence that followed in our home was the loudest, most oppressive sound I'd ever heard. "You should get out of the house, Mom," Jason had said during one of his brief, dutiful visits, his voice careful, as if I were a fragile heirloom he was afraid of dropping. He'd stood in my kitchen, a stranger in the place where I'd once bandaged his skinned knees. "Some sun, different scenery. You've been in this gloom for too long. Dad would want that for you." Amanda had nodded beside him, a study in manicured concern. Her sympathy always felt like something she'd read about in a manual. "We're all pitching in. It'll be a fresh start, just what you need." Their words, as hollow as they might seem now, had felt like a life raft tossed to me in a stormy sea. I'd been drowning in the quiet of our Tennessee home, a home that now felt like a museum dedicated to a life that was over. Every surface held Jake's imprint. His favorite armchair was still molded to the shape of his back, a permanent dent I couldn't bring myself to fluff out. So I went. Hope, I've learned, is a stubborn weed. I opened the small velvet-lined jewelry box I hadn't touched since the day before the funeral. Nestled inside, next to my mother's simple pearl necklace, was the gold wedding band Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't expensive or flashy, but it was real, solid gold. I sold it at the dusty pawn shop downtown, the one with the barred windows. The man behind the counter, his face a roadmap of hard living, had looked at the band, then at me. His eyes soft with a knowing sadness. "You sure about this, ma'am?" "Absolutely," I said, the words tasting like ash. even as my throat tightened and my eyes stung. When Amanda had mentioned, so offhandedly, that everyone was contributing for the flights, I offered my share without being asked. It felt good, in that moment, to feel needed, to be included, to be more than just the widow, the ghost in the empty house. That night, after packing my small carry-on, I cried alone in my room. Not just for Jake, but because for the first time in weeks, a tiny, fragile shoot of something close to hope had begun to push through the frozen ground of my grief. The illusion began to crack the moment we arrived at the airport. At the curbside check-in, I noticed the bright, shiny priority tags on their matching Louis Vuitton bags, first-class tickets for Amanda, her mother, and Jason. I had a fleeting moment of confusion, but I quickly brushed it aside. We'll all be sitting apart, of course, Amanda explained smoothly, her hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like possession. A branding. Just for boarding convenience. Don't you worry. We'll come check on you after takeoff. She'd waved away my small carry-on. Let us handle it, Bella. Just relax. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I clung to the carefully constructed narrative of family and healing, right up until the moment I stood at the airline counter. The agent, a young woman with a tired smile, tapped her keyboard with that particular brand of sterile airport politeness that usually precedes bad news. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. There's no return flight booked under your name. The world didn't just tilt. It liquefied beneath my feet. There must be some mistake, I insisted, my voice sounding thin and reedy. I'm with my son's family, Monroe. The reservation should be under Monroe. She checked again, her eyebrows drawing into a deeper frown. I do see the Monroe group, but the return tickets are only for 6 passengers. You're not listed on any return leg. A cold dread spread through my veins, sharp and absolute. When I turned, my movements slow and jerky, I saw them. That's when Amanda turned, not with surprise, but mild inconvenience. As if I were a child interrupting adult business. And she said, in that flat voice I'll never forget, "You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket." FL text. The return trip. She shrugged. You'll figure it out. She said it like she was telling me the gate had changed. Casual, inconsequential. Jason didn't correct her. He didn't say a word. He just adjusted his Ray-Bans, looked somewhere over my head, and kept walking. They left me there. Right there, on the scuffed linoleum floor. They left me like an old receipt. Used, discarded, unnecessary. Something to be tossed in the first trash can. The last time I'd felt that kind of abandonment, I was 9 years old. Sitting on the dusty porch, waiting for a father who never came back. That ache became a fossil in my heart. And now 60 years later, the universe had delivered a cruel punchline. I had raised, loved, and devoted my life to the person leaving me. I looked down at my iPhone. Its surface cool in my hand. I wasn't expecting a message from Jason. He wouldn't dare. I was checking to see it was still there. That I was still there. It was the only thing left that said I existed. I thought about calling someone. But who? My sister Sarah was gone. Breast cancer, 5 years ago. My friends from the bridge club or the library committee had their own grown children. Their own surgeries, their own pains. I would not, hand any of them my profound humiliation, neatly wrapped in polite concern and delivered with a casserole. Instead, I took a deep, shuddering breath that tasted like jet fuel in despair. I walked on unsteady legs to a hard, vinyl bench near gate B22, and I sat down. I arranged my body with my back straight and my chin high, the way my mother had taught me when facing hard things. I might not have had a ticket home, but I had something else. A secret weapon tucked close to my heart, tucked securely in my bra, right next to the frantic beating of my heart, was a small, cream-colored envelope. Inside, along with $960 in crisp $100 bills, was the slightly faded business card of James Robert Monroe III, Jr., my husband's old friend and former law partner. Someone who, at Jake's funeral, had held my hands in his and looked me squarely in the eye, repeating the promise he'd made for years. If you ever need anything, Bella, anything at all, you come find me, no questions asked. Now I would, because being left with nothing didn't mean I had nothing left to do. The game was over, but I was just now learning the rules. People talk about grief as a visitor, but they're wrong. Grief doesn't knock politely when it arrives. It's a squatter. It crashes through the front door of your life, dragging its muddy boots across your clean floors, and settles into your favorite chair as if it has every right to be there. That was what it felt like when Jake passed. His death wasn't sudden in the way a car crash is sudden. We'd had warnings, small heart scares that we'd papered over with jokes and denial. But it was complete, absolute. One moment he was there, a solid, breathing presence in the world, humming a Sinatra tune off-key in the kitchen. While searching for the cinnamon he always misplaced, the next, he was gone. I found him slumped in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, a fallen oak tree. His favorite Starbucks dark roast still steaming, in the world's best grandpa mug the kids had given him last Christmas. A stroke, the doctors at Vanderbilt said later. Massive, irreversible, final. He died on a Tuesday. It had rained that morning, soft gray, persistent rain. The kind that doesn't pour but soaks. The kind that seeps into the bones of the earth, and into your own bones without you even realizing it's happening. I stood at our farmhouse kitchen sink for hours after the coroner's van had taken him away, watching the individual droplets slide and merge, as they journeyed down the window pane, like tiny lost souls trying to find their way home. The days and weeks that followed were a surreal blur of Pyrex dishes and awkward well-meaning condolences. The funeral itself was short and simple, just as Jake would have wanted. He'd never liked being the center of attention. If anyone cries at my funeral, he'd say, flipping burgers on the patio, a grin on his face, make sure they bring a mop, because I'm not cleaning it up. I tried not to cry. I brought a whole packet of tissues anyway, stuffed deep in my black purse. After the service, after everyone had gone back to their own lives, the real silence began. The weeks crawled by, each day longer and heavier than the last. Some days I didn't leave the house at all. I'd sit in his worn leather chair, the one that had molded itself to the shape of him. And I would try, with a desperate intensity, to remember the exact way he laughed, when something was truly, deeply funny. Not the polite chuckle, but the full belly-deep uninhibited roar, that made his shoulders bounce, and his eyes disappear into happy crescents. I tried to remember the specific way he looked at me when I came into a room, a look that said, there you are, I've been waiting for you. I tried to remember who I was before I became Jason's mom, and then, ultimately, Jake's widow. Then, Jason started visiting. Not often, and never for long. He'd come by on his way home from his high-pressure job at the tech startup, his hugs light and distracted, lasting exactly 2 seconds before he'd pull away, already looking at his phone. Mom, he'd say, perched on the edge of the sofa, as if ready for flight. Amanda and I have been talking. We think you should get away for a bit. A change of pace. We're taking the kids to Disney World for spring break. You should come with us. Amanda would nod from the doorway, never quite coming fully into the room, her sympathy as perfectly applied as her lipstick. Just to breathe a little, Bella, she'd say. A change of scenery. Don't you think Jake would want that for you? He wouldn't want you sitting here in the dark. It felt, in that moment, like someone had thrown open a heavy curtain, in a room I hadn't realized had gone dark and stale. I hadn't been out of Tennessee in over 5 years, not since Jake's health had begun its slow, insidious decline. The thought of it, the feel of warm Florida sand between my toes, the weight of real sun on my shoulders, instead of this persistent, gray grief. The simple luxury of not waking up to that deafening, empty silence. It stirred something in me. It was a feeling I thought had died with him. A faint but unmistakable flicker of life. Are you sure? I asked, my voice embarrassingly hopeful, betraying my desperation. I don't want to be a burden. Of course, Amanda smiled. though the expression never quite reached her calculating eyes. Your family. I clung to that word in the following days. Like the life raft it pretended to be. I repeated it to myself as I packed. As I sold my ring. As I pushed down the small, nagging voice of doubt. Family. I am family. Now, sitting on that impersonal airport bench, watching families reunite with joyful tears and tight embraces. The raft had shattered, plunging me into an icy, shocking reality. Family wasn't what I thought. It wasn't an unbreakable bond, it was a transaction. And I had just been informed that my account was empty. My fingers, cold and clumsy, reached into my purse. I pushed past the crumpled tissues, the half-empty roll of peppermints, the tube of hand cream, until they closed around a small, thick envelope. Jake and I had called it our break glass in case of emergency fund. We'd started it after his first major heart scare. A secret pact between us. A few $100s at first, hidden in a book. Then adding to it quietly over the years. A 50 from a birthday card. 100 from a tax return. It was never for groceries or birthday presents or bills. It was for the day we'd whispered to each other in the dark. When one of us had no one else to rely on and needed to move fast. I unfolded it carefully. The paper crackling with a promise that felt both ancient and immediate. $960 in crisp $100 bills. It wasn't much by their standards. By the standards of Louis Vuitton and first-class tickets. But it was completely, utterly mine. It was enough. With a resolve that felt new and unfamiliar in my bones, I stood up, my legs only slightly trembling. I walked out of the terminal, the automatic doors sliding open with a sigh, and I flagged down a yellow cab idling at the curb. 287 Jefferson Street, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The Monroe and Wade Law Office. As we pulled away from the curb and into the flow of Nashville traffic, the familiar streets of my life began to pass by. The Whole Foods where we'd shopped every Saturday. With a resolve that felt new and unfamiliar in my bones, I stood up, my legs only slightly trembling. I walked out of the terminal, the automatic doors sliding open with a sigh, and I flagged down a yellow cab idling at the curb. 287 Jefferson Street, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The Monroe and Wade Law Office. As we pulled away from the curb and into the flow of Nashville traffic, the familiar streets of my life began to pass by. The Whole Foods where we'd shopped every Saturday. The park where Jake had run alongside a wobbly Jason learning to ride a bike. The old movie theater where we'd held hands in the dark for 4 decades. I watched it all stream past the window, and I realized with a sudden, crystalline clarity, that this wasn't an ending. It was a recalibration. A fundamental rewriting of my entire existence. The law office of Monroe and Wade was exactly as I remembered it. A dignified old brick building that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. JR's secretary, a woman who had been there since Jason was in diapers, recognized me immediately. Her eyes widening in surprise before softening with genuine sympathy. "Bella Monroe," she said, coming around her desk. "Oh, honey. I was so sorry to hear about Jake." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice thick for a moment. She ushered me directly into JR's office. He was still there, just as Jake had described him. Older, a little thicker around the middle. Slower to rise from his large, leather-clad chair, but his handshake was just as firm, his gaze just as sharp. "Bella," he said, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. "My God, I haven't seen you in years." I am so sorry to hear about Jake. He was the best of men." "Thank you, JR," I said, sitting carefully in the client chair opposite his desk, placing my purse on my lap like a shield. "What can I do for you?" he asked, steepling his fingers. His full attention on me. I took a steadying breath. "I'm here to change my will." He raised a bushy white eyebrow. "All right. Anything specific?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear and firm in the quiet room. "I want to remove my son, Jason, and my daughter-in-law, Amanda, from every part of it. Every bequest, every trusteeship, every single mention." He paused, his professional demeanor faltering for just a second. He had been at our house for barbecues. He had watched Jason grow up. "You're sure about this, Bella?" "Definitely." He didn't ask why. JR had known Jake, and by extension, he knew me. He knew I didn't do anything lightly, especially not something of this magnitude. "I'd like to add a new primary beneficiary," I continued, opening my purse and sliding a folded pamphlet across the polished mahogany of his desk. "An organization called Elder Haven. They provide housing assistance, legal protection, and community programs for elderly people who have been mistreated or abandoned by their families." He picked up the pamphlet, looking it over, before his eyes met mine again. "That's very specific." "I've become a very specific woman, JR," I replied, holding his gaze. "And while we're at it," I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I want to make sure that what happened to me this morning is something I can legally respond to, not just emotionally." "What exactly happened?" he asked, his tone shifting into pure legal focus. "They led me to believe I was going on a family vacation. I contributed a significant amount of money from the sale of a personal item under that pretense. They took me to the airport, and then they informed me they had only purchased a one-way ticket for me and abandoned me there. They also took my luggage. I believe that qualifies as financial exploitation." "Elder abuse," he said, the term clinical and heavy in the quiet room. "Yes, there are statutes for that, especially when the victim is considered a vulnerable adult." "Did they access your bank accounts directly? Forge your signature?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I gave the money freely, but I gave it under false pretenses. The entire trip was a deception." He nodded slowly, a grim understanding settling on his features. "We can explore civil actions, but at the very, very least, I can help you ensure they never touch another single cent of what's rightfully yours." "Good," I said, the word feeling like a stone I was laying as a foundation. "Because I want this change notarized. Effective immediately. I want the originals stored in your fireproof safe here, and digital copies password protected, and sent only to an email address I will provide. I want a third-party executor named. I don't want anyone in my biological family touching my affairs, my medical decisions, or my legacy, ever again." "You got it," he said, and there was a new respect in his eyes. He picked up his pen. "Let's get to work." For the next hour, we dismantled, line by line, clause by clause, every assumption, every dream, every promise Jake and I had built together over a lifetime. We went through the will we had signed together after he retired, a document filled with so much hope for a future that would include our son. It wasn't a process fueled by spite or hot rage. It was something colder, cleaner, and far more powerful. It was clarity. DeFea was the surgical removal of a malignancy. When I finally left JR's office, a new, slim folder in my hand, I stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. The weight that had been crushing my chest since the airport felt different. It wasn't gone, but it had transformed. From the heavy burden of betrayal into the solid weight of purpose. I didn't feel weak or broken. I felt clean. I took a cab to a modest, clean motel downtown. The kind with thin walls and a buzzing ice machine. It texted. It wasn't where I would stay forever, but it was a port in a storm. In my anonymous room, I spread the documents across the floral bedspread. My life, the house we'd scrimped and saved to pay off over 30 years, the 50 acres of farmland my father had left me, that we'd quietly leased for cattle grazing, the handful of conservative investment accounts we'd tended like a careful backyard garden, the separate savings account Jake had always insisted I maintain just in case, was now reduced to columns and categories, percentages and clauses. But for the first time in years, it was all under my control, and my control alone. Well, the case had come, and now, my legacy would serve a purpose far greater than funding my son's indifference. I left it all, every stock, every bond, every square inch of land, to Elder Haven. I included a personal, handwritten letter to be kept with the documents, addressed not to anyone in particular, but to every woman who might one day find herself sitting where I sat. Left behind, dismissed, treated like a burden instead of a blessing. If you are reading this, I wrote, my pen flowing smoothly across the paper, please know this. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. Your feelings are valid, and you are not done yet. Your story is still being written, and you hold the pen. The morning light, pale and determined, filtered through the thin motel curtains. Finding the paperwork complete, signed, notarized, and official. Their names Jason and Amanda Monroe. Once written in the confident, permanent ink of primary beneficiaries, were now erased, redacted, legally voided. They were replaced not with the hot, messy scrawl of anger, but with something far more potent and enduring, intention. I hadn't done this in a fit of rage. Though God knows the anger was there, a hot coal in my belly. I had done it slowly, deliberately, carefully. Because I had come to understand that the most important choices in life are not made in the middle of the storm. When the wind is howling and the rain is blinding, they are made in the profound stillness that comes after. When you have finally stopped pretending that the rain will pass, and have instead decided to build a boat. I called JR one last time. I want digital copies of everything, I said. Password protected. Sent only to the new email address I created. The originals stay with you, in your fireproof safe. Only you and the named executor have access. Understood, Bella. And if anyone from my family contacts you, I let the sentence hang. He didn't even pause. I will inform them that they were removed from all documents, by your own clear and sound mind, and I will direct any further inquiries to your third-party executor. I exhaled, a long, slow breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. The chain was cut, not in a burst of furious, dramatic hacking, but with the quiet, precise snip of freedom. It is a strange and hollowing thing, to deliberately erase someone you brought into the world, from the future you once dreamed for them. To look at the name you whispered with such wonder the first time you held them, and to systematically remove it from the story of what comes next. But I had come to a brutal understanding. Inheritance isn't just about money or land or stocks. At its core, it is about trust. It is the final, enduring vote of confidence, and trust, once shattered as completely as mine had been, cannot be rebuilt with panicked phone calls, or guilt-fueled flowers, or shallow apologies, delivered a lifetime too late. The next day, I went to the bank. When the young, cheerful teller finished my transaction and asked, as she was trained to do, "Is there anyone else you'd like to add to this account for access?" Mrs. Monroe, a family member. I looked at her, and for the first time, I smiled a genuine unburdened smile. "No," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Just me." Those two words had once sounded like the epitome of loneliness. Now, standing in the fluorescent glow of the bank, they sounded like something else entirely. They sounded like survival, like strength, like starting over. Not as someone's mother, or someone's widow, or someone's inconvenient background presence, but simply as Bella. I scheduled the moving truck for a Tuesday, midweek, when I knew Jason would be buried in meetings at his startup, and Amanda would be at her yoga class, followed by a long lunch with her friends. I didn't want a scene. I let myself in with the spare key, still hidden under the third geranium pot on the left, exactly where we'd always left it for emergencies. And this, I thought as I turned the key in the lock, certainly qualified. The movers I'd hired, from a company 2 counties over, to ensure no small-town gossip would precede me, were fast, efficient, and kind. Just a few specific things, I told the foreman. A large, gentle man named Leo. I pointed to Jake's favorite reading chair, the one that had molded to the shape of his back. Over decades of evening newspapers and mystery novels, I directed them to a single, carefully labeled box of books. Our shared favorites, the ones filled with his margin notes. I gave them our wedding album, heavy and leather-bound. I handed them his faded navy cap from his days in the service, and the beautiful hand-stitched quilt my mother had made for our bed. Nothing else. On the cold granite of the kitchen counter, now stripped of the fruit bowl and the cookie jar, I left a single, sealed white envelope. Inside were the house keys and a short note, written in my firmest handwriting. Do not call, do not ask. I am exactly where I want to be. And then, without a single backward glance, I walked out, closed the door, and got into the cab, waiting at the curb. I was done. Willow Grove independent living was nothing like the grim, institutional facilities I had feared. It smelled of fresh lemon polish, and, faintly, of the soft jazz playing in the common room. The people I passed in the bright, airy hallways looked up as I walked by, not through me, as if I were invisible, but at me, with open curiosity and friendly smiles. Welcome, Mrs. Monroe, the woman at the reception desk said, her smile warm and genuine. We've been expecting you. I'm Maria. It was the first time in months, perhaps even years, that someone had said my name like it mattered. Like my arrival was an event to be noted and welcomed. She showed me to a corner unit on the second floor. It was light-filled and peaceful, with a wide window. Jake's chair had been placed exactly where I would have put it, near the window, where he could have watched the birds. On the small dining table was a welcome basket, with local jam, a box of crackers, a small bag of coffee, and a handwritten note from the director herself. Thank you for your incredible generosity in helping us make this place a reality for so many. Now, it is your home too. Welcome. Diva, they didn't know. What Jason and Amanda would never be privy to was the beautiful, private irony of the situation. Willow Grove had been recently expanded and refurbished, in part, by a very large, very specific donation from a new benefactor, me, through Elder Haven. My estate wasn't just a simple transfer of assets from one generation to the next. It had become a quiet revolution. In the days and weeks that followed, I slowly, carefully, began to settle in. I joined the afternoon book club, a lively group of 6 women, and one soft-spoken retired professor named Arthur Sue, who always brought the crossword puzzle from the newspaper to share. We argued passionately over plot twists, laughed too loudly at scenes no one else would find funny, and drank tea with names none of us could quite pronounce correctly. We belonged to one another in the simplest, purest way possible. By showing up, I started attending the gentle yoga class, held in the sun-dappled courtyard. I signed up for a watercolor class, something I had loved as a young woman, but had given up decades ago when Jake's career, when the sheer busyness of existing got in the way. The best part, the part that healed something deep inside me, I hadn't even known was broken, came at 5 p.m. every single day. Someone, a staff member, or sometimes one of the residents, would come knocking gently on my door. Dinner's ready in the dining hall, Bella. And there, in the cheerful, noisy dining room, was a seat at a round table with my name on a small, tasteful card. For the first time in a long, long time, I sat down to a meal without hesitation, without feeling like I was in the way, or being tolerated, or a burden. The house I had left behind, the one filled with a lifetime of memories, was no longer my home. I had finally learned the difference. Home isn't where you store your things, it's where you are wanted. And I, at long last, was finally home. 6 months passed. 6 months of blessed silence from my old life. 6 months of morning coffee in the sunroom, watching the seasons change in the courtyard. 6 months of rediscovering the sound of my own laughter. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, the email arrived. It was from J.R. Terse, and to the point, as always. Notification letters were delivered by certified mail this morning at 9 a.m. I read it once, then closed my laptop. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The machinery I had set in motion was now turning of its own accord. By 11 a.m., my cell phone, which had been so silent for so long, began to vibrate on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a name I had once loved so fiercely. It had nearly unmade me. Jason. I watched it ring. The vibration, a frantic, angry buzz against the wood. I felt nothing but a deep, still calm. The call went to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and again. 16 calls in a single day. I watched the name flash, over and over. A frantic pacing energy on the other end of the line that could no longer touch me. There were no messages left. Just the silent, desperate rings, echoing in my quiet apartment. The next morning, the email from Jason arrived. The subject line was a masterpiece of misplaced priority. "I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden." I opened it, not because I expected sincerity or any real understanding, but with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist, studying a strange and foreign culture. "Mom, I don't even know what to say. Amanda and I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, and I'm just stunned. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Look, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't handle the airport thing right. Maybe we underestimated how hurt you were. Amanda says it wasn't meant to feel like abandonment. She just thought you'd prefer the flexibility of staying a few extra days on your own. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but this, Mom, this is serious. You've removed us from everything. The house, the savings, the land, even the joint account we used for the kids' school fees, has been frozen. I'm not saying we didn't deserve some kind of consequence, but you're cutting us out completely. After everything, after all the years, at least let us keep the land behind the house, the garden. You know the kids helped me plant those tomatoes last summer. It means something to them. To us, we're not perfect, but we're your family. Can we please talk? Just one call, just 5 minutes. Jason, we didn't think you'd actually go through with it." That one sentence, buried in the middle of his plea, told me everything I would ever need to know. It was the core of their entire perception of me. They had thought I was too old, too soft, too grief-stricken, too desperate for their approval, to have any backbone left. They thought I would bark, but never bite. They thought I would weep, but never walk away. And now, faced with the consequences, they were shocked. Shocked that the woman who had once sewed the buttons back on their coats, who had kissed their scraped knees, had the fortitude to write them out of her story with a steady hand. But I had, and I would not undo it, because they hadn't just left me at an airport. That was merely the final, dramatic scene. They had been leaving me behind in 1,000 small, quiet ways for years, choosing their own comfort over my care, their convenience over my compassion, their carefully curated social media performance over simple, honest presence. That afternoon, I found myself in Willow Grove's small, peaceful library, pulling a book of Mary Oliver's poetry from the shelf. I wasn't even really reading it. I just needed the weight of something honest and beautiful in my hands. My friend Helen Ma, the retired English teacher with a sharp tongue and a heart of gold, slid into the armchair beside me. "You've got that look again, Bella," she said, peering at me over her reading glasses. "What look is that?" I asked, setting the book down. "The one people wear after they've just told the world who they really are," she said, a knowing glint in her eye. "And more importantly, who they refuse to be anymore." I smiled, a real, unforced smile. "Maybe I have, Helen. Maybe I have." She grinned back. "Good. The world needed to hear it." I looked down at my phone, at the email still open on the screen, at the closing plea for just 5 minutes. I thought about crafting a reply. One clean, sharp, truthful line that would sever the last remaining thread. Instead, I held down the power button and watched the screen go black. Then I picked up my pen and my journal, and I wrote, "Some things in life are inherited, others are earned through sweat and tears. And some, like peace, like self-respect, like a new beginning, are created from scratch, with your own 2 hands. From the rubble of what others have broken, let them wonder. Let them rage, let them miss the sound of my voice, when their birthdays come and go without a call from me. Because I will be here, surrounded by people who don't expect me to fund their comfort, in exchange for their absence." I didn't owe Jason, or Amanda, or anyone, a conversation. I had already given them something far more valuable, a clear, unambiguous goodbye, and a door that I had closed, locked, and thrown away the key. One evening, I was helping Ruth, a former librarian, organize the communal art supplies. She looked across the table at me, her eyes kind and direct. and asked softly, "Do you ever regret it, Bella, cutting them off like that?" She didn't need to specify what it was. In this place, we all had our versions of it. I met her gaze and held it. "Ruth," I said, my voice clear and sure, "I only regret one thing. I regret not doing it sooner." She nodded slowly, a world of understanding passing between us. "No more questions," she said, and went back to sorting the paintbrushes. That night, back in my own apartment, I lit a single beeswax candle for Jake, on the small table beside his chair. I did it not from a place of gut-wrenching grief, but from a deep, steady well of gratitude. For the love we had shared, for the partnership that had taught me what I was worth. "I'm okay, Jake," I whispered into the quiet, peaceful room. "I'm more than okay." Then, I added something I hadn't even known I needed to say, until the words were hanging in the air. They thought I'd fall apart when they left me. I leaned closer to the flickering flame, as if he were sitting right there in his chair, listening. "But you know what, love? They're the ones who lost something precious that day. Not me. They lost their way back. Because that's what you do, when you mistake a person's silence for weakness. When you mistake their endurance for consent. No, I don't mistake myself for someone who owes anyone anything. Not Jason, not Amanda. Not the grandkids who might one day ask their parents why they don't really know their grandmother. That story, that burden of explanation, is not mine to carry. I know my truth. I lived it. I survived it. I am Bella. I am Bella who leads the letter writing workshop on Tuesdays. I am Bella who uses too much ultramarine blue in her watercolors. I am simply Bella. They say my name when I walk into a room, and they say it with warmth. They save me a seat at the table, not out of obligation, but because my presence is desired. They wait for my opinion in the book club, before deciding to turn the page. They know I prefer peppermint tea in the morning to wake me up, and chamomile with honey at night to help me sleep. I chose new names to include in my life. I found a new family to love, a family not bound by the cold accident of blood, but forged in the warm, daily choice of presence, of mutual respect, of simple, abiding kindness. And that, in the very end, is what real family is. It is chosen, it is cherished, it is kept. When I blow out the candle each night, I smile. I smile because I no longer owe a debt of gratitude to anyone who made me feel small. The only person I owe anything to is myself. For finally finding the strength to stand up, to walk away, to light a match, and to watch the old lies, the old betrayals, and the old pain go up in smoke, leaving nothing behind but clean, warm light.